Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to wish a warm welcome to you all at this gathering. My name's Matthew Stevens. I'm the Research Librarian at the Caroline Simpson Library, Museums of History New South Wales. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. We're so pleased to be able to host this event along with the Colour Society of Australia. The Caroline Simpson Library specialises in the history of houses, interiors and gardens in New South Wales back to the 18th century. And we spend a lot of our time with our library visitors discussing the history of interior design and the use of colour in these domestic settings. Just last week, I assisted an interior designer who was working on a new beach house design. Her client had a particular love of paint colour from the 1950s and 60s, and the designer wanted to immerse herself in the colour palette from this period. Along with the usual paint charts and other ephemera, I handed her a copy of 60 beach and holiday homes, selected and annotated by Phyllis Shillito, and published in Sydney in 1954. At the back of the book is an extensive guide to colour selections for the rooms and the houses, which you can match up with our BALM colour charts. This is a resource we have used for years, but I was less aware of the Shillito legacy until we acquired a large archive produced in the 1940s by one of Shillito's students, Helen Burgess. Subsequent writing on the colour theory contained in this archive by David Briggs and Eva Fay has been a complete eye-opener for us. Since this initial acquisition, more and more works from students studying at the Sydney Technical College, East Sydney, has been acquired. And perhaps most extraordinary is that this material now covers 4 decades of Shillito's teaching practice. Fascinatingly, we can see core principles being communicated across the decades, while at the same time, we can see how the student work reflects the distinctive changes in taste that are inevitable over such a length of time. And I think you will have seen that upstairs if you've had a look. This evening, you have the opportunity to view this work, as well as examples lent to us just for tonight. You'll also have seen the latest acquisition of Eva Fay's monumental collection of her student work, with detailed contemporary annotations of the pedagogical process that only someone with years of experience can give us. The role of institutions like the Caroline Simpson Library is to remind the current generation of designers and students that there is a rich interior design and colour history here in New South Wales, and that it is there to find if you ask yourself the right questions. The presence of so many former students of Shillito and her legacy here tonight also reminds us that this is very much a living history. And the events like this one give us the opportunity to share both knowledge and memories, not only with our contemporaries, but also the next generations of designers. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's presentations. And I'd now like to introduce Dr David Briggs. David has been teaching classes on colour for more than 20 years and currently teaches colour, drawing and painting at the National Art School and the University of Technology in Sydney. His publications include a chapter on colour spaces in the Rutledge Handbook of Philosophy of Colour in 2020 and a 2-part paper on the elements of colour in the Journal of the International Colour Association 2023. He also has 2 outreach websites, The Dimensions of Colour and Colour Online, and David was past president and is currently vice president and New South Wales Divisional Chair of the Colour Society of Australia, co-chair of the IAC Study Group on Arts and Design, and is a committee member of the AIC-ISCC Colour Literacy Project. In 2022, he co-authored with Eva Fay, who is with us tonight, a study of Shillito student material that was published in the proceedings of the AIC 2022 conference in Toronto, Canada. So David, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, can you remember all that? Because I'll be back later at the end, but I'm just coming on quickly to start.
You need to just skip to the
thank you.
order.
I'm just coming quickly at the start to thank the Caroline Simpson Library and the team here have just been fantastic in setting this up and everything in the lead up to this. Okay. All good. Thank you very much. So I'm just coming on now to introduce Dr Catriona Quinn, who teaches design, history and theory at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, where her prize-winning PhD on the role of the client in interior design was awarded in 2021. At Sydney Living Museums, she curated the Rose Seidler House Caroline Simpson Library and Research Collection and, in 1993, the first historical exhibition on an Australian interior designer. Recent publications include chapters on In the Other Moderns, Sydney's Forgotten European Design Legacy, Margot Luer's No Limits 2022, and for Fabrications, the first literature review on post-war interior design 2024. Catriona is active in the international field, presenting at conferences and as a committee member of the Historic Interiors Group. Thank you, Catriona.
While you're doing that, thank you so much, David, and thank you to the Colour Society for inviting me here tonight. I'm delighted to be with you and to present my little introduction to some of the context around Phyllis Shillito. In the lead up to Christmas 1971, a Sydney newspaper columnist named Ron Saw dreamed of, quote, an open order on Krug, Bollinger or Goldie Hawn's unlisted phone number. But if he couldn't have that, he told his readers, what he really wanted was his own room on view, a space designed expressly for him by a member of the Society of Interior Designers of Australia. Saw parodied the designs of the fictitious Cyril Cedric Milk AIDM cider for Climbers Corner held at the Sneer Club, his satire indulging the trope of the effeminate male decorator, qualified not by training but social superiority. It was not until the 1980s, when university degrees in interior design were first awarded in Australia, that a new generation claimed status as the first to be academically qualified, understandably at pains to distinguish themselves from the occupation's freight of associations as publicly shamed by Saul. Yet even the most rudimentary historical investigation shows interior design education had been offered in Sydney and Melbourne from the 1930s, in government institutions and by influential private teachers. Saw's characterisation was as inaccurate as it was homophobic. In fact, hundreds of post-war interior designers had been schooled in the important training grounds of tech colleges, trade schools for builders, plumbers, dental technicians, carpenters, mechanics, yes, but also designers and artists. Phyllis Shillito, who we're all here for tonight, was a leading figure in this undervalued and underestimated educational milieu. Now, architectural studies, which had moved to universities 60 years earlier, around 1919, enjoyed comparatively greater prestige, and importantly, architecture's history writing became embedded in academia, which by and large devalued the aesthetics and practices of interior decorators. Tainted by association with cliches of the feminine and the effeminate, Australian interior design remains an understudied historical field tangential to architecture. Its correlation with trade-based education, like Shillito's, additionally underscoring what I term a technical difficulty. Survey histories are still yet to be researched, let alone published. Remarkably, only one substantial monograph on a decorator has yet been written, and that was 30 years ago. Among many aspects of the history of 20th century interiors, the technical education of interior designers and decorators has received scant attention from the Academy, despite the existence of rich archives such as you have seen tonight. The practices of the post-war decades in Australia were, however, particularly significant and deserve our attention. Economic expansion created new opportunities as consumption of designed interiors increased and a drastically enlarged profession became organised and institutionalised. These changes occurred at a critical juncture of geopolitical turn away from a colonial relationship with Britain towards the United States and Asia. Yet the social and cultural world of the 1940s and 50s tended to conservatism. A lot was happening. An extensive national program resettled 180,000 displaced European refugees, the largest intake outside the US. But the White Australia policy legislated against Asian immigration. Indigenous Australians had few legal rights and religious sectarianism was rife. There were no securely funded national theatre or ballet companies, and many hotels closed at 6 p.m. parochial attitudes lampooned by satirist Barry Humphries and more seriously addressed by taste reformers like Robin Boyd, or via legal action against councils by Harry Seidler, characterised 1950s Australia as a place of limited suburban outlook. Into this conservative, yet paradoxically changing social environment, design training dramatically forged with expanded, innovative courses, complicating this idea of a backwater and suggesting the Australian context has potential for novel perspectives on design education networks. So tonight, we're going to step into that studio that was particularly important to these decisive shifts in the 1940s and 50s, East Sydney Technical College, via rare archival student folios illustrating the curriculum developed by the college's head of design, Phyllis Shillito. Tonight's focus overall, with so many experts present on colour theory, suggests new perspectives on the dissemination of principles from the Werkbund, Ulm and Bauhaus schools. But I want to contextualise these by placing a high historical value on technical studies, to consider the implication of government investment in design education and the impact on the development of the profession. Before distinct courses were introduced, versatile graduates of architecture, textiles, handicrafts and industrial design represented interior design's fluid prehistory, in which interiors were made by a constellation of contributors. Decorators tended to arrive at the field from a variety of educational sources, including tech colleges, art schools, and the well-worn path to London, especially the Central School, and to New York at the School of Fine and Applied Arts. Some expat Australians, such as Raymond McGrath, remained overseas indefinitely. Others, like Margaret Lord, stayed for lengthy periods, establishing significant careers in a larger market than Australia could offer. In Sydney in the 1920s, decorator Margaret Jay opened her consultancy, which is considered the first. There were other female entrepreneurs with small retail studios, such as Thea Proctor, Marion Hall Best, Nora McDougall and Margot Lewis, and these women were prominent in the press, especially Sydney's vibrant magazine culture, with Proctor and McDougall also teaching design and writing for newspapers. Others, such as Molly Gray, worked within department store advisory studios, and still more women operated invisibly on teams within large city architecture firms. Perhaps unexpectedly, Sydney's largest early independent decorating studios were founded by men, coming from architecture or the antiques trade. So we had the Stuart Lowe Studio, founded in 1930, Derek Dean in the 1920s, and Clive Carney's Artistry, founded in 1933. By the 1950s, we see from this image of the showroom at Artistry, staffed by Shillito's diploma graduates, these exact same firms had expanded drastically from their origins in furnishing supply to a full custom design service. So we enter the studio at the Darlinghurst campus of East Sydney Tech. The art school was an offshoot of Sydney Tech, one of the many founded in the second half of the 19th century, where instruction generally reflected a Beaux-Arts model of design training. Arriving at East Sydney Tech in 1925, Phyllis Shillito's roots were in the north of England, arts and crafts, design reform and manufacturing traditions. Trained at the Halifax Technical College from 1912 and awarded first-class honours at City and Guilds of London in 1917, she was long familiar with the antecedent scientific views of colour, which David is going to go into in his talk. As a senior lecturer at the Liverpool Art School, she navigated design schools as a feminine voice in a male-dominated public education system, and I'm sure that experience served her well at East Sydney Tech. By 1933, she had founded the Tech School of Applied Art and Industrial Design, and with it, the first design diplomas were awarded. In 1937, Shillito introduced interior decoration as an elective stream, and 134 students, all women, took up the option to study the specialised field. She was responding in part to rising public interest in this as a burgeoning occupation for women, Only a year earlier, a young Margaret Lord had left Australia, stating she knew no interior decorator in the country, though she understood it to be an established profession overseas. Shillito's diploma was positioned to fill that absence. And I think it was extremely important in establishing interior decoration as a practical career path rather than necessarily elitist, amateur and socially contingent. As a result, by the 1950s, many Sydney firms were staffed by students and graduates of East Sydney Tech, illustrating Shillito's impact on the transition of the occupation itself from interdisciplinarity to specialisation. The 5-year diploma course was offered full-time or part-time for evening students. Foundational studies over 2 years were followed by elective specialisations. Shillito stated she'd borrowed progressive ideas from schools in Ulm and Munich. The foundational structure and practice pedagogy traced their lineage from the Deutsche Werkbund, the Bauhaus and the Ulm School. Specifically, the 7 study areas of the Bauhaus basic course have been identified, including the golden section and golden mean grid, which her students highlighted as a key part of the course. And now, of course, we have at least 4 student workbooks, now mostly in museum archives, but also in private collections, which you've been looking at already. And these provide us with a visual guide to Shillito's course. They were submitted for final assessment, and I'll run through these fairly quickly because David is going to speak much more specifically about the colour theory in them. But they are the work of Thelma Butterfield, who was there from 1942 to 47. Helen Burgess, and this is a book from 1947. Barbara Abbott, from 46 to 49. And Vivian Chaffer, who is 51 to 53. And Chaffer's folio documents this foundational course particularly, comprising colour theory, forms... Oops, hang on, I've got it behind, there we go. There we go. And historical sources, by which Shillito aimed, as she said, to equip students with the capacity to design anything. The folios reveal interior design students' access to classes in drafting, planning and rendering within the Tech College's School of Architecture. And archival photographs point to model making as valuable preparation for commercial work. Now, several of Shillito's students from that time, from the 1940s and early 50s, have recorded their memories of the East Sydney Tech studio in oral history interviews. Barbara Abbott found Shillito's confidence frightening and felt, quote, a pressure to achieve. David Lorimer thought Shillito was a big draw card for the course, but in person found her very hard on students. She played favourites, he told me, and had a clear pecking order, males at the top. On the other hand, Viennese migrant Heinz Gerstel, a student in the mid-50s who worked in his father's custom cabinetry firm, was not such a fan. He chafed at the long evenings spent sketching, as he told me, a block of wood with a cloth thrown over it. Bored to tears, he told me, he dropped the course in the second year. Others judged the work and study load incommensurate with the diploma's worth at that time. Lorimer, already working in a reputable decorating firm, left after 3 years. He reflected later that a diploma was not essential for a successful career until the 1970s. But he, like many other students, recall Shillito's colour wheel and used it extensively in his practice. And it was colour theory that became the most renowned feature of the course, partly because Shillito, who was not herself an interior designer, exercised authority derived from her international experience as an instructor at a time when innovative use of colour was a marker of modern design. And of course, David is going to go into this in much more detail, but I'd really like to just propose from here on that it's important to understand colour theory as part of design studies' place in a much wider societal context. So if we look out of the window of the Sydney Tech Studio in the direction of the Australian post-war landscape in general, our view will turn us towards the Commonwealth Reconstruction Training Scheme, the CRTS, which saw an influx of mature students, transforming the college and impacting the interior design field as a whole. The CRTS was administered by a dedicated federal government committee in the Department of Post-War Reconstruction, which offered professional, vocational and rural training to returned service men and women and to war widows. Fees were subsidised and a modest living allowance was paid, aiming to equip people for a return to civilian life in a national effort to bring transformation and improvements, described by historian Stuart McIntyre as the inescapable consequence of war anticipated as soon as it had begun. In contrast to Europe, reconstruction here was geared towards job creation rather than repair of the built environment. And unlike the United States, our economy had not recovered from the Great Depression. Given close to 1 million Australians returned from service overseas, and half that number again were redirected from wartime occupations, the impetus was employment. Supported by agricultural exports, local manufacturing and protectionist trade tariffs, the Australian economy boomed in the 1950s and 60s. Consumption associated with home ownership, design and leisure followed. The CRTS anticipated an educated workforce needed to support expanded infrastructure. And by mid-1951, over 300,000 people had successfully applied, and the scheme is today regarded as one of the most significant strategies for social change in Australia. Now, the resulting expansion of Eastern Tech's interior design course occurred in a milieu of contradictory socio-political influences. The CRTS was initiated by wartime federal Labor governments, shaped by leading political figures, the Minister for Education Clive Evatt and Director General of Post-War Reconstruction, the Keynesian economist H.C. Nugget Coombs, both intellectual pluralists exceptionally well versed in and committed to art and design as fundamental to Australian cultural life. Under Liberal Prime Minister Robert Menzies from 1949, the CRTS flourished, doubling university enrolments. Also under Menzies, it was wound down, though implementation and review lingered until 1957. So by 1948, the small Eastern Tech campus was said to be bursting with over 3,000 students, including 500 return services and 700 evening students. In 1950, the press claimed this was the largest art school in the world. The majority of the 1,250 evening students at the college in the early 50s, including CRTS students, studied design under Shillito. Now, media-savvy Shillito publicised the CRTS by positioning design as important to Australia's future as an industrial producer, her students' serious purpose to ally their art with modern industry, predicted to have a profoundest effect on Australian life. Student exhibitions demonstrated the technical college's plan to fit students for post-war reconstruction jobs. Her courses were set to meet overseas standards, impressing visiting UK textile manufacturers and European fashion ateliers. The CRTS also profoundly altered the demographics of graduate decorators, swelling the ranks of tertiary qualified male practitioners. This had significant implications for interior design as it began to professionalise. So you have CRTS graduates like Tom Gillies, Edmund Dykes, Donald Shaw and Don Johnson all being instrumental in the professionalisation, with the last few being involved in the foundation of the peak body, the Society of Interior Designers of Australia in 1951. We have the founding of the Good Design Award, and others like Tom Harding, who graduated from that scheme, worked hard on the subcommittees raising public awareness, ethics and educational standards. All of these men became prominent in interior design and its professionalisation. So looking inside the student folios of the 40s and 50s really offers us a glimpse of this collision point between interior design pedagogies, including Shillito's colour theory instruction, and political interventions, inviting a more complex understanding of technical education and its relationship to government investment in design and professional and social change in Australia. Oh, sorry, they were the founders of the CIDA. I should have had that up before. Move on. This extended beyond vocational training to include interior design as a topic for adult education to engage people in current affairs. Shillito was one of several women who regularly appeared on radio and television in the press to discuss the importance of colour and design. So this expanded educational field began to impact the way interiors were discussed, moving beyond homemaking towards a more sophisticated framing of the profession. Shillito's curriculum remained standard at East Sydney Tech until the mid-1960s, even after she began her own private school of design in 1962, which joined similar establishments run by entrepreneurial decorators such as Mary White to educate the next generation of designers, now documented in the archives of Marty McIlvenny, Eva Fay and Chaffer's daughter, Yvette Matthews. I think these resources point to great potential for understanding Australia's lineage of design pedagogies and towards the growth of the new courses at Randwick Tech and Sydney College of the Arts that emerged in the 70s and 80s and their correlation with the mature discipline. I also want to briefly signpost new territory illuminated by this expanded topic, and that is the relationships between interior design, masculinity and queer cultures in the context of this rapidly changing technical education. While feminist theory has reclaimed highly selected Australian women decorators' biographies, male interior designers' histories are comparatively unaddressed. It might be expected that greater post-war male participation resulted in elevated professional status. But I think the discipline's public prestige was nuanced at best, where you have CRTS publications representing what might be called a robust image of Australian males. Press coverage of interior design reflected anxieties over manifestations of Australian masculinity, especially those that engaged with so-called feminine tastes and occupations. And this includes the way the decorators were represented, but also the way they strategically represented themselves. Finally, I think it's notable that of Shillito's interior decoration graduates who studied her theoretically weighted courses, many went on to work as colour consultants for paint companies or as interior designers in private or corporate practice, where authority in the use of colour was a fundamental skill. Vivian Chaffer, for example, had a short but substantial career as a colour consultant for a paint company and at Sydney's largest department store, Anthony Hordens & Sons, in their contemporary shop. Other graduate decorators such as June Carney, David Lorimer and Tom Harding, who designed this room, were expert at colour mixing and the coordination of complex, subtly related palettes across multiple furnishing components, and this was at a high demand at the top end of the market. So my last thought is really, when we think of an Australian interior decorated under the influence of the Bauhaus or progressive colour theory, there are certain images that I think unbidden come to mind. Is this one of them? But this was produced by two decorators who trained in exactly that method. The arenas Shillito's graduates worked in, the high-end studios delivering bespoke interiors to newly rich, often immigrant clients, document what might be termed as the unpredicted outcomes of training shaped under the protracted influence of the Bauhaus and Ulm schools. Their careers show theoretical design education's unexpected reach into the kinds of decorative practices that are routinely overlooked by conventional architectural histories deemed outside modernism's orthodoxies. Tracing the educational, professional impact and creative output of these graduates exposes the limitations of aesthetically and culturally biased histories and the potential for much greater discursive territory. Thank you.
Questions. If you have a question, could you call the mic? Okay.
Or we could do questions at the end if no one's got a question.
Someone got a question? All right then.
Just let it sink in.
All right. Thank you, Catriona. That's a wonderful setting the scene for Shillito or Shillito. We were arguing before over the pronunciation. I think it's Shillito. So we're very honoured tonight with our second speaker as well. We have an actual, genuine student of Shillito from East Sydney Technical College. Jocelyn Maughan is, excuse me. Jocelyn Maughan studied at East Sydney Technical College, now the National Art School Sydney, from 1954 to 1958, graduating with a Diploma of Fine Arts with honours, specialising in painting. During this period, she studied colour under painters, including James Jimmy Cook, and in 1956 as an evening student under the head of design, Phyllis Shillito. Her teaching career included 32 years at Meadowbank TAFE, where she established the Fine Arts section and became the inaugural head of the art school in 1966. Jocelyn's painting career spans more than 6 decades, and she remains very active as an artist at age 85. She is an exhibiting member of the Australian Watercolour Institute and a Fellow of the Royal Art Society, and was recognised in the Queen's Birthday 2018 Honours List with an Order of Australia Medal for service to the visual arts and to education. And Jocelyn's going to talk about her recollections of Shillito as her teacher at East Sydney Tech, and what she used and didn't use from Shillito's colour theory. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite an honour to be here in such a privileged society and to follow in such an interesting talk as that which we have just heard. So thank you. Inevitably, in order to talk about Shill, as we all knew her, I will sort of probably have to include some information about myself. I left school. In those days, you could leave school at 14, which I did, even though I was apparently quite academically okay, to the disappointment of the principal. But my parents, very interested in art, both of them amateur artists, wanted me to go to art school. So there we are. And so at barely 15, I was in the first year of what was to become a 5-year course. I wasn't really sure whether I'd last the distance because I was rather interested to be a motor mechanic. I like the fitting together of things, and that is not totally unrelated to art, as you can see with Leonardo da Vinci. Not that I aspire to his level of brilliance, but I certainly enjoyed that logic of one thing that works with another. Hence my enjoyment of colour and design, because there's a logic in it which I enjoyed, contradictory to painters who, in many cases, and not all, who thought that by throwing paint around they could get what they called an expressive result. Now, the best expression can usually come from knowledge, where you know how to do something. Anyway, going back to my first year at art school, the first year was a very broad year, and as just was mentioned, the first 2 years were in fact preparatory years, and the course in those days was 30 hours a week. So it was quite extensive, from 9 to 5 or 9:30 to 5 every day, and many of us stayed on to evening classes, hence that is how I came to be a student of Shillito's in the evening. So in our first year, it was mainly drawing. In fact, I think 70 or 80% of the course was various forms of drawing in 2-hour slots. But one of the 2-hour slots was, in fact, a colour and design course, which was taught, from my memory, and I just remembered her name, Mrs. Maddox. And she may have been a student of Shillito's, I'm not sure. But it was very much a Shillito course, but fairly basic. Not a lot was expected of us. A few basic colour wheels and some interiors and things like that. So that was our first year in the art school. But we never got a formal lessons in colour in the art school after that. The second year did not include colour and design. We could branch off into a day a week in specialising in design if we wanted to go over on a Monday to Shillito, to the design school. Otherwise, we could do a one day in the illustration course with Alfred Cook, or we could do a little bit of painting. I actually, at that stage, started to do an illustration course with Alfred Cook, and I was quite good at figure drawing, still am, I believe, and it appealed to me, the idea of figure illustration. I think I was led along by artists like William Boothroyd in the Women's Weekly, who had those wonderfully dramatic figure illustrations, probably illustrating romantic stories, cops and robbers and all that sort of stuff, but they were very, very well drawn. And and then we did a course in painting as part of that for 4 hours a week, and one of the teachers was a chap called Tom Thompson, and he had, and you mentioned the CRTS a moment ago. Now this was very significant in our art training. The CRTS course for the returned servicemen did not exist as such when I was a student. As you say, I started in 1954, and that course had phased out by then. But some of our teachers, like Tom Thompson, Bert Flugelman, John Coburn, and a number of others, Les Bircher, they had all been students of the CRTS course, which was a very, very thorough course. And one of the teachers there in the CRTS course was James or Jimmy Cook, and he was an excellent teacher who really fostered colour and design, although he only taught in the painting school. But he actually gave lectures in colour and design. I've still got all his teaching notes, but I don't know where he gave those lectures, where they were public lectures. Now, they may have been at the Mitchell Library or somewhere like that. They were not in the art school. Anyway, Tom Thompson had been a CRTS student, and he had a great influence on us as students, and he said, why do you need to be doing an illustration course? You're a talented painter. You should switch over in your third year and start the fine art painting course. And I remember going home and saying to my mother, Tom Thompson thinks I better do painting instead of illustration. And she said, oh, well, you better do that, hadn't you? So that was the end of that. So I'm very glad I did. And the 3 years was, in those days, from that would have been 56, was mainly concentrated on portrait painting, 2 days a week of painting the nude, 1 day of painting compositions, things of that kind, a bit of outdoor painting, and 2 hours a week. Last thing on a Friday afternoon was allowed for abstract painting. Now, we are talking of the diploma course of the 1950s. So abstract painting was rather, oh, well, we better give something for those poor students. We'll do it on a Friday afternoon. No one will hang around for that. And we had students. We had teacher Ralph Bolson, nice fellow, hopeless teacher. We had John Passmore, and I remember John Passmore coming up to me, and I was a very young-looking 16, 17-year-old with plaits. And he came up to me and he said, and what do you think you're doing? And I said, oh, I'm very interested in Cézanne, Mr. Passmore. Now, any decent teacher would have said, oh, are you? Well, here we are, let's have a talk about that, or here's some examples. And he said, you wouldn't know Cézanne if he stood in front of you. And he never came near me for the rest of the year. So that was artistic snobbishness. And now, amongst the students at the National Art School, most of us were pretty young. Fellow students in my year were Brian Dunlop, who was a little bit younger than me, John Montefiore, quite a lot of, who later on became quite significant and well-known artists. And there were a few mature age students. One was a chap called John McGrath, who had worked for an architect, Peter Muller, and he worked as a draftsman, but he was one of those chaps that was extremely interested in learning and in gurus, and he would often encourage and take people in his little Volkswagen out to the University of New South Wales to show them this wonderful library, and we could look at a book on architecture, and he really inspired us. So he was a case of learning from fellow students. He was a few years older than us, not much, 2, 3, and that inspiration went through, and he'd obviously heard about Shillito, and so he said to some of us, now, you're not getting much colour and design teaching in the painting school, except for Jimmy Cook, nobody else is teaching it, and you're just supposed to know it off the top of your head somehow. You've either got it, as they say, or you haven't got it. And so he said he thought some of us should go over to the Shillito school, so he dragged us over there, and that's where I came to do the Shillito evening course for 2 years, one night a week, I think it was, might have been 2, and I went right through all her exercises. I found them very good. I think technically having to do all the little coloured squares and all that sort of thing, I had a mind to be able to do it because I was also a calligrapher and a lettering student, and I liked that sort of accuracy, so it was okay with me. I don't think a lot of the painting students would have probably handled it all that well, but I enjoyed it. And the two really important things that came out of doing that course, and I can remember she was a big bouncy lady, about probably nearly 6 foot tall, beautiful legs and great posture and physique, a bit bossy. I can remember her one evening, and she gave us a wonderful talk on discords and dirty colour. I have never forgotten that. It was the most wonderful talk. She had it all illustrated, and we had to do the little colour swatches and things. And she explained to us that if you take even 2 adjoining hues on the colour wheel, I haven't got a colour wheel up there, but you all know colour wheels. So you take a light orange and a crimson red. So they both belong to the family group of red. But if you, for example, take the crimson red and add white to it and put it next to the orange, you create what is called a discord. And that can work both with harmonious hues, but it can also work with contrasting hues. Now, discords can be incorrectly used, and often are, and create dirty colour, particularly in the greys. So if you get a dark warm grey next to a light cool grey, you get, think of somebody with a dark brown jumper and pale faded blue jeans, and they look totally drab because you've got this dirty colour situation of the dark warms and the light cools. And it was just like a revelation to me. And later on in my teaching career, I noticed this particularly, especially with mature age students. And I read a bit about it. In other respects from the medical point of view, and it would seem that older people had a little bit of a visual problem in the perception of the cools and the warms. And I noticed if you took a mature age group out landscape painting, they'd immediately have dark brown rocks or something and dirty pale grey seas or something. Oh God, it looked terrible. So this dirty colour, and I've still used this. I still do freehand teaching to people who come in. I don't charge anyone, but inevitably people bring in a painting to me at Patonga and say, what's wrong with my painting? So I immediately give them a launch out on the Shillito theory of dirty colour, and I don't know how much they understand, but I try to explain to them, and I get out her teaching notes, which I've still got, and say, look, this is what's wrong with your colour scheme, you've got that dirty grey background, etc. And I can remember Shill saying, of course the trouble is, she said, looking at me, a few other painting students in the front row, she said, you people from the painting school, you've all painted beautiful nudes against those dirty old army blankets. And of course, after the Second World War, I suppose general stores, government supplies, blankets, grey blankets, army handouts were pretty normal, and so the teachers used to get them for backdrops, and faded grey army blankets as a backdrop against a beautiful bronze nude, about the last thing you want. And so you got this absolutely jarring discord between the colours of the nude. And, it was just, again, what she did was really open my eyes to that. So I think that was probably one of the most significant things, and I've never heard of anyone else talking about it. And yet to me, it's like, wow, it's what colour's about, is getting your relationships right. Not just your harmonies of hues and your little bits of contrast and all that sort of stuff, but etc. So anyway, I just found her course fascinating, and but it was interesting in the art school. I don't know whether it's artistic snobbery or what, but somehow the departments, once you got into the third year, fourth year, fifth year, they rather stayed separately. Now, Schill had, I think there was a photograph of the simple little wooden cottage over in the corner. If you happen to know the National Art School and the beautiful stone buildings, this was like a bit of an odd thing in the corner of the grounds of a little timber, basically a cottage, really. And in that, it only had 3 classrooms or 2 classrooms and an office. And in that, she conducted all these wonderful courses. I don't know how she fitted them all in, because she had thousands of students. And so she ran courses in fashion, and ran a beautiful, every year, a beautiful fashion design mannequin parade in the grounds, and, lots of society people came, and a lot of her students too were society people who, what do we do with the daughter? We'll send her to the art school, and she can do an interior course and learn to decorate her house, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of that went on. But it was a serious course, and so the evening courses were more for these other sorts of things, so that people could do these catch-up courses on different things. And I know after I'd finished with my 5-year course, she called me up. She sort of knew me, I suppose, and she said, look, could I come over? By that time I was 20. Now, most kids are still finishing school, and I still look pretty young. And she said, could I please come over at night and teach the Thursday night students? They were all interior design students, I think. And could I teach them some drawings, perspective drawing and things like that? And the classroom was set up basically like a classroom with desks and tables. There was nothing fancy about it. Blackboard on the wall. And I remember going a bit before the class started and doing beautiful perspective drawings in white chalk on the blackboard and preparing the lessons. And I was very thorough. And anyway, I can remember that she wanted me to come along on the Thursday night. So I taught this group, and mostly chaps. I don't know whether they were industrial or interior design now, but there was sort of a whole room full of fellas. And anyway, I just went into it. I mean, I wasn't conscious of blokes. I just went on doing my job, I was always like that. Anyhow, the next Thursday night, Schill came in to see how I was going. And not only was the class I was teaching, but there was a queue halfway out to Oxford Street. And she said, what are all you blokes here for? You're not enrolled. Oh, we've come to join this class with a lovely young art teacher. She looked at me. She said, you can't fit all those people in there. She said, can you come back on Friday night tomorrow? I said, oh, yeah. All right, you blokes, you all come back on Friday night. So I got 2 nights a week for a year. I have no idea, but I never lost a student. I didn't get any proposals either. But anyway, so that was an interesting time. But later on, of course, Schill started the course on her own right when she retired. And because I was head at Meadowbank, and also amongst my career in TAFE, I also was head for, I think, a year at Gymea TAFE and 2 years at Bankstown TAFE. I moved around a bit and then back to Meadowbank, which I'd started. And they're somehow within the syllabuses were fairly loose in those days. I mean, there was a 2-year certificate course by the time I got there, but I was allowed to have certain extra subjects. So I ran a course in colour and design, and so I employed Schill's teachers, people like Eva Fay and a number of others. Eva would remember them all, Virginia Hill. I'm trying to think of the different ones. You might remember them, Eva. You remember? Yeah. Gary Shinfield, of course, Ros Keane. Oh, look, Ros was a wonderful story too. I'll tell you Ros's story. Anyway, so I hope this is of some interest to you. I don't know, I'm probably boring the socks off you. But I'm just talking off the cuff, which is the best way for me. So I ran these courses in colour and design. And then eventually I took them up myself for the painting students, one specialising in painting. And what I did, I adapted it. I didn't teach a copy of the Shillito course because I knew that for the modern young painting students, it would not go down. It had to be adapted to a more painterly point of view. So what I did, I got them to do similar small exercises, usually using oil paint rather than gouache, and I'd give them little problems like, okay, we're going to do a little abstract design. I want you to have a dominance of straight lines, so many curves, and I want you to have a harmony of hue, a contrast of chroma, etc. So they had to do colour chords, and that really made them think about the relationship of the colours through. And I can remember at one stage I was invited to do a course at the National Art School under Arthur Freeman, and that was a similar thing. And I had some really interesting students in that course who went on to become quite famous artists. And again, I taught it from a painter's point of view so that I could adapt what she had done, and especially areas like the dirty colour, but also understanding that you didn't just talk about colour loosely, because every time you picked up a colour, it had to be the right hue, the right chroma, the right tone, and any one of those things in that colour chord could go wrong. But as Jimmy Cook used to say to us, one of our teachers, I mentioned him before, he said one of the most valuable things about any colour theory is to use it for when something goes wrong. If you've got the ability and the talent to make it go right, well, you possibly don't need it. But when something goes wrong, you think, oh, God, that colour's not working, what the hell's wrong with it? Well, then you can go back to your colour theory and have a look at it. Now, I think on Friday I've been asked to do a course for a sketch group that I go to up in Kincumber. I'm up on the Central Coast, and they want me to do a course on drawing features of the face, that's right, eyes and noses and mouths and things. So I don't know how it'll go, because, you know, you've got to be... They do life drawing, but the trouble is with life drawing, they draw the whole figure and they don't concentrate on the portrait. So I will break it down into those elements so that the same thing, if something goes wrong, they can look back and say, well, I'm having an awful lot of problem with this nose. Oh, I didn't have the centre line, I haven't got that. So they'll have a bit of theory, hopefully. So I've done a lot of teaching notes, handouts for it, my usual way of preparing a lesson. So that'll be on Friday. So I still do that sort of thing. I still give free help if anyone wants to come up to Patonga. I know it's a bit of a distance for you, but if any of you want to, just ring me first. My only other love is tennis, and I might be down on the tennis courts, but you might need to just check where I am. I do free portraits for people just because I love painting. I've just got to paint. It's just, I'm totally ridiculously compulsive. Somebody should lock me up. And so because I do so many, I just give them away. But, so look, I've had a marvellous career out of it, and certainly the students that went through the Meadowbank course and did the colour course, another course that I resurrected from the past, which is not quite colour and design, but is calligraphy, and I started the calligraphy course in Australia. And I wanted to preserve the qualities of great lettering, and lettering as design, and the beauty and shape of a letter R, you know, the balance of the curve and the triangle, etc. And I was fanatic. I would have almost given up painting for lettering because I so loved the purity of design. And I worked as a letterer for many years as a casual in amongst everything else. So, I don't know, perhaps some questions from you. I don't know what I've covered, David. You might like to ask me some questions about things. I may not have covered everything, I'm not sure. So,
yes, does anyone have in the audience?
Was anyone a student of mine here?
Me.
Hello, yes.
And I remember that little cottage. I was an industrial design student,
Right.
the only girl with a whole lot of blokes, and you taught me drawing.
Oh, how
and
lovely.
It was memorable.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And your name was?
Denise Larkin.
I remember, yeah. Okay,
You
good.
remember my ex-husband, John, probably. He drew much better than me.
Right. Oh,
But
look,
we
that's
both,
lovely.
you taught both of us, yes.
Well, thank you. That's lovely. I love teaching. I enjoyed it so much that probably just as much as painting. I just love the mixing with people. The teaching is really selling. And if you can sell an idea to someone, maybe I should have been a preacher. Not quite. Anyway, any more questions? Or anybody else who was a student of mine? Right? No? But I think she was an amazing person. I mean, she retired still a very handsome woman with the most beautiful legs. She always wore her dresses a bit short. And she had the most beautiful calves to her legs, and she knew it. And I mean, after all of that, then she starts a school down at the Rocks for the next, I don't know how many years, 20 years or something. I mean, what an incredible woman. I was probably one of the last ones to see her alive. I visited her in hospital when she was dying. So, I mean, we were good friends. I didn't know a lot about her private life at all, really. I mean, she was a very private person. But she respected me as an artist and as a teacher, and I of her as well. So it was a long friendship, so it went way, way back. Yes?
Jocelyn, amazing life, so well done. Excuse me.
Yes.
Calligraphy and, teaching children to handwrite
Yes.
is a dying art. It looks like it, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
it's interesting, my grandson in Ireland are being taught again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are. So
Fancy
I just
that.
thought, where do you think calligraphy and writing is going to go?
Well, I don't know. I wonder
becoming an art
sometimes
form.
with the with the advent of all the computers and the skills that are now being skills that I probably don't have in using all the modern technology. It's a pity, but maybe there's lots of things like the use of gold leaf. How many people can still use that? I mean, they almost become an anachronism. I mean, it's a great shame. I mean, it's like drawing. I mean, drawing is hardly ever taught. I mean, I'm probably one of the few people. Anybody can look up my website. You'll see what I do. I'm a bit traditional, but too bad. I enjoy it. I don't care. But those skills just disappear. The only thing I think happened with calligraphy, it got taken up by too many people who used it just as rather a frivolous decoration, and they lost the purity of design. Now, there was a calligraphy teacher. I unfortunately just missed him, but I did have one of his students teaching for me. His name was Eric Roberts, and he wrote a book on lettering and design. Very simple little thin book. I've got a copy of it, and he taught at the National Art School, and he used to come in before class and decorate the blackboard with the most beautiful lettering, and he just enjoyed the beauty of it. And I think a lot of the works in that book were photographed by one of his students, who later on, Mr. Howell, I think he later on became a teacher of sign writing at Sydney Tech. Another course which I also did in the evenings, so that I could get a few more. I just love learning. And I mean, there were so many wonderful teachers out there, and they didn't all just work from 9 till 5. So pretty well every night I was somewhere learning something as well as the course in the daytime. So, yeah. Yes?
Jocelyn, that was one of the most astonishing talks on art that I have ever heard. I'm Stephen Shedding. I curated an exhibition at the Maritime Museum called Fish in Australian Art, and I selected one of your paintings. I had very few works by living artists, but I chose your painting. It was the subject was Patonga. It was a stunning painting, and what was even as nice to match the painting, the title that you gave it was Patonga, a quaint little drinking village with a fishing problem.
Spot on, yeah. Oh, look. Yeah. I mean, the fishermen up there still ply their trade along the beach. There were 10 fishing boats when I went there 30 years ago. I think there's only 5 now, and they still... I mean, whether you agree with it or not, I mean, there's lots of ideas on whether you should or should not be catching fish, but they trawl along the bay and often pull the fish in. It looks like a biblical scene. And I just love the opportunity to draw humans. And I just paint people, whatever they're doing, But you're welcome to come up, and I'm sure if you give me an hour, you can walk away with a sticky, wet portrait of yourself. Only be about this big. Yeah. But... look, I've had a wonderful life, and I am just so lucky at my age to still be able to do it, which is wonderful. So, lesson to all of you, keep going if you possibly can. Yeah. So, any more? No? Okay. All right. Thanks, guys and girls.
tough act to follow. But seriously, if any of you, especially if you're practitioners, please take Jocelyn up on her offer to visit her at her. She got a little gallery at Patonga.
It's not a public.
No, that's right. No, we'll just take that. Yes. We'll take that bit out of the recording, but Jocelyn's incredibly generous with giving assistance to anyone who's been doing this for 20 years since she's retired, or so. Yeah, yep, great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
No, wonderful. All right, well, and I'm very glad to be here. Let's see if this is going. Yes. Very glad to be here on International Colour Day 2024, because actually this the origins of this event tonight are tied with a couple of other International Colour Day events that we've had. International Colour Day is on March 21st every year, and it's organised by the International Colour Association, who is the parent body of the Colour Society of Australia. And in the origins really go back to an exhibit at the National Art School for International Colour Day 2016, when I displayed a couple of photographs I'd taken from Jocelyn's Shillito portfolio, and as illustrations of discord and colour chords and colour keys. And I'd noticed that the text in the portfolio and in her teaching materials were, I recognised from a book by a theorist called Henry Barrett Carpenter, who was a teacher in Rochdale, which is just down the road from where Phyllis Shillito was teaching before she came to Australia. And he had discussed the concept of discords, and then Eva Fay, who was at that event, recognised the concepts from her training at the Shillito School, and when she borrowed Carpenter's book, she discovered that there were huge chunks of Carpenter in her notes from the Shillito Design School, like topic after topic. And so we thought this was interesting, because the only study that had been done of Shillito's colour theory before then had made no mention of Carpenter at all. And then in 2021, at our conference, national conference, which was coincided with International Colour Day, Michael Lesh gave a talk on the Carolyn Simpson Library, and he showed a slide of a portfolio, the 1945 Burgess portfolio. And so Eva and I came in and had a look at it, and we saw that notes in it were also referencing Carpenter and another theorist called Maitland Graves. So I looked through studied the notes in that portfolio in detail, and together we wrote a paper that we gave at the online International Colour Association conference in 2022, and you can download the paper from the conference proceedings. And we also made a big PDF of the whole volume with annotated page by page for where we found the sources for her illustrations and the text. And then, of course, at the same conference, Eva launched her book on the Shillito Design School, which I'll refer to as well.
Brilliant book.
So the Burgess portfolio from about 1945 has 36 sheets with 30 pages of illustrations in gouache, as well as some overlays on some of the sheets, and about 44 full or part sheets of typescript text, which we believe are typed up lecture notes. And so going through, and it's divided into 3 sections labelled Shillito theory, Ostwald theory, and Munsell theory. So the section on Shillito theory has 2 diagrams, 2 original diagrams by Shillito. There's the very distinctive Shillito colour wheel, which has 15 segments. It's quite different from any other, so you can always see someone who's been influenced by Shillito. The 15 comes from having 2 of each primary, what's called a warm and a cool of each primary, and then there's a secondary colour, and then there's intermediate colours between the primaries and the secondaries. So that adds up to 15 altogether. And this idea of having two paints for each primary, it's in writing for painters from at least 1903, is that reference I've got there. There's one diagram of showing that as in a graphic form, but it wasn't commonly used, at least it wasn't commonly illustrated as a colour wheel at this stage. It became much more widely used from the 60s onwards, and it's quite widely used now, and it's sort of a way to get around the fact that you can't really mix a full range of colours from just a red, yellow and blue so-called primary colour.
Can I just interrupt there? I should have emphasised that. That was a wonderful aspect of Shillito's, the idea of having a warm yellow and a cool yellow, a warm blue and a cool blue, etc. And when you're painting, no matter what your palette is, you need to know immediately if a colour is not right and it's not working because it's either too warm or whatever, you know what to fix it with. And it's such an important aspect. So
Thank you. It's sort of a way to get around the fact that red, yellow, and blue don't work as single paints. But if you have two paints, you've got 6 altogether. Then in practice, it gives you a palette that gives a reasonable range of colours around different hues at reasonable chroma. The other circle is what she called the tertiary wheel, and basically it's obtained by mixing the secondary colours, green, purple and orange, and so each of those bigger spikes is a 50-50 mix of those apparently, and then the smaller spikes are different proportions. So that's again quite a distinctive graphic that sort of is there right through. You can see the version from Eva's portfolio many decades later, and it's without really convincing antecedents. It's kind of harks back to some very early colour wheels from the late 1700s, early 1800s, when not just a colour wheel based on primary colours was presented, but a wheel based on secondaries, from mixing the colours that you got from mixing orange, green and violet. So, they're different in the sense of not having that sort of star-like quality. And then there are some star-like diagrams, but they're not really showing the tertiary colours at all, and they're a different arrangement completely, really. With the tertiary wheel, those tints sort of just become more dilute going out from the centre, whereas these other star-like ones are sort of tint shade scales, in other words, going from black to full colour to white, so they're not really related. So the rest of the section on Shillito theory basically the whole text can be tracked back to this book by Henry Barrett Carpenter, more or less verbatim. If you want to see these, you can look at that PDF we made of the whole thing, but I'll just show a couple of examples quickly. So this is the typescript from the back of one of the sheets in the Shillito theory section, and they're the extracts that from Carpenter's book. And you can see there's a very close correspondence there. And this is the section on discords that Jocelyn was talking about. So this idea of having things out of what Ogden Rood called the natural order of colours, or what Carpenter called the natural order of colours. And so the label at the bottom there would be an example of a discord where you've got a darker blue and a lighter violet. Okay, so that's instead of the violet being darker than the blue. Yeah, that's right. It's in a sense it's a clash, but it's like a spice. Yeah. 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 It's another section again, which is more or less verbatim. So in the Ostwald section, the text there can be traced to the sources I've listed there. So a 2-volume book by Ostwald, and then two other books explaining the Ostwald system. The Ostwald system is a classification of colours of objects that's different to the more familiar hue, lightness, and chroma, which you all know, right? The classification of colours according to the hue, which is the position around the colour wheel, the lightness, which is the grayscale, and then the chroma, the strength of colour. Okay, so that's a more usual way of classifying, or more common way of classifying colours. But this is a totally different way of classifying colours, where you can think of, for any hue, you have variations that can be closer to the pure colour, or closer to white, or closer to black. You see? And so see how those diamonds divide up that hue page according to that. Or you could think of it as the perceptual having a proportion of white and a proportion of black and a proportion of colour, pure colour in the thing. Okay, so this is a system that was widely used at that time and fell into disfavour, but now there's another thing called the natural colour system, which is structured similarly. It's defined a bit differently, but it's the same geometry to it. And so this was widely used at the time, and so on the left you have the meticulously copied plates in gouache from the student portfolio, and on the right you have the corresponding illustrations from one of Ostwald's books, his atlas. So the student would have to meticulously match each of those little diamond areas in gouache. Okay, and there's what is it, 8 of these. And there are these are simpler ones that are partly, some of the simpler ones could be from a few different places, but other ones are from those Ostwald publications. So that's the Ostwald system. And then the Munsell system is the more familiar system of classifying according to hue, lightness, and chroma. And we can trace the illustrations to various publications explaining that system. On the left, we see 2 Munsell system plates from the Burgess portfolio. So again, the student has sort of meticulously mixed up and painted each of those little patches individually. They don't correspond to any version of the Munsell atlas that I've come across, but I eventually found an article in Life magazine from the 1940s that had that same illustration. So it's either from that or they're both from the same source. It's by the All Colour Company in New York.
The Munsell system, may I interrupt, is just a very useful thing for painters. You don't need to go into it too technically, but just a concept that as you go out, the colours are stronger and purer. You come in, or you go up in tone or down. And that just in, out, up and down, it's like cutting up an orange. It just gives you a concept as a painter when you're moving around your palette.
Yeah, very important to have a sort of a three-dimensional concept of colour, that's right. So I want to stress that these references aren't in the portfolio. So it was just purely by trying to recognise these from the text. And the first few are easy, but then of course you become obsessed with trying to find all of the other ones. So this is actually pretty relatively obscure, but it was a magazine article on colour organisation, again from 1938. This one. Okay, these were easy to find. These sections still in the section on Munsell theory, but they're in a book called The Art of Colour and Design by Maitland Graves. And this was quite an influential text of the time, published in 1941 and a second edition 1951. And again, big chunks of the text from this section verbatim from, or close to, from Maitland Graves. And Shillito especially used these concepts of colour keys and colour chords. So this is value keys and value chords. So this is a classification of groups of values according to whether they're high key, with mostly light, or low key, mostly dark, and major if there's a big range, or minor if there's a small range. Okay, so it's just a way of classifying groups of values, but based on the Munsell system. And this continued to be used again right through, right up to Eva's portfolio from almost the end of her Shillito's career, and you keep seeing this some variations on this diagram, and on these what were called value chords. So Graves had an idea that it's good to base a value structure on 4 different values, and those values should be spaced not completely evenly, to have some sort of sweet spot between uniformity and variety. So he had this idea that the four values should be spaced with 2 close together and the others further apart. So he had, and then he sort of, what we see there, if you can see it, he sort of, so how do we space those in relation to the whole scale? So it's, the assumption is that 4, if it's got to be 4, and you can either have the small interval at the bottom or at the top. Okay, and so there's what are they? D value chords and W value chords according to whether the small interval's at the bottom or the top, and you can see that they're directly out of the Maitland Graves book, which is on the right there. Okay. All right, so I'm just showing a couple of the other portfolios that we have. The Thelma Butterworth one from, it's actually a year earlier, it seems, and it covers a lot of the same ground. Can you recognise the tertiary wheel in there, and does this have a pointer? Yes. Okay. Shillito colour wheel, 15 segments. There's our D and W chords over there. Munsell, those three, and Ostwald there, and Ostwald circle here, and so on. And then some of these are design exercises based on using those Maitland Graves value structure, and some are based on Ostwald's theories of colour harmony. These actually, I think it's, there we go. They're labelled exercises in Ostwald colour, so presumably applying his theories of colour harmony. So there's only about 8 or 9 sheets of text in this portfolio, and it covers some of the same ground. One thing that isn't in the Burgess portfolio is some comments on colour symbolism, and again these are verbatim from Maitland Graves. I don't know a lot. I'm not sure anyone knows a lot about what was being taught, what textbooks were being used in the 40s, but there is one little survey that was published by a guy called Royal B. Farnham, and he sent a questionnaire out to quite a variety, very varied colleges and educational institutions in America, and got I think it was something like 40 or 50 replies, and it just gives us a hint of what sort of what was being taught and what textbooks were being used. And it turns out, so on the right there, that's the full range, and most of them maybe were just being used by one school. I think Carpenter's up there, so Carpenter was still being used. He says, on the matter of books, there is a wide range listed with the authors Munsell, Graves and Ostwald in the lead. So it's just interesting. It's the same basic list as Shillito was using at this time in Australia, okay, with the addition of Carpenter, who was basically her neighbour in Yorkshire. And then this is the Vivian Schaffer portfolio. Again, you'll see some familiar diagrams there, I think. So our Maitland Graves colour codes again, tertiary colour wheel, a Munsell hue circle and value scale, a few Munsell diagrams, Ostwald, okay? And then some of these are discords and what Carpenter called simple harmonies and extended harmonies. And then there's a whole bunch of colour exercises as well, quite a few of which are specifically applying the Maitland Graves colour value spacing idea. This is Jocelyn's folder from her studies with Shillito, and you're probably starting to see a pattern here. Yes, so a lot of the same things are showing up again and again, including a lot of things that are just sort of described in using the turns of phrase that Carpenter used. So in our paper we discussed Eva's portfolio, which has now been donated to the library here, and you can see that a lot of even the subject headings are just using similar expressions to Carpenter's contents, and that's backed up by the text from those sections often being more or less verbatim to Carpenter's original book. So you can see just some of these sort of things like dirty colour schemes, all these use of intermingled colours, harmonising, jarring colours, and so forth. They're still there in 1970s in the notes given out, or the lecture notes being taken, with a few additions. So, whoops, sorry. So Cheskin, Biren, Cheskin was sort of like a commercial student and practitioner of commercial colour and design, Biren as well. Otherwise, mostly fairly familiar. And if we, so this is from Eva's portfolio shown in her book. And again, there's our two colour wheels. There's our, and so at this stage, they're not doing these elaborate reproductions of Munsell hue pages and Ostwald hue pages, okay, but instead that effort is being put into more like original colour design exercises, but also some variations on colour wheels. I think there's about at least five different colour wheels that involve meticulous mixing of colours to create the relationships for the colour wheel.
And David, are you still able to teach this at the National Art School?
I think it's the only place where people would get this kind of meticulous matching of colour in paint would be in fine arts courses, yeah. So yes, we do an exercise to exactly match a Dulux colour chip using the Munsell framework and to do it quite quickly, quite just by adjusting value first and then hue and then chroma. Thank you for asking that. Don't know how the time's going, but I'm almost done. So here's extended harmonies and simple harmonies. This is sort of terminology from Carpenter. Colour reaction, harmonising, irritating colours, intermingled colour. These are all chapters from Carpenter's book. Broken colour, and there we go, discordant colour, which is the discords. And our familiar diagrams from Maitland Graves there. This is different. There's some studies looking at transparency, okay, which I haven't seen in any of the earlier portfolios. And this could be from Joseph Albers, who had a bit of an obsession with transparency. I don't know, no text to definitely back that up at this stage, but that's an indication that it's a possible indication she was still taking on, judiciously taking on things, but the Carpenter remained like the backbone of the course. The Carpenter remained the backbone of the course, and she was just judiciously taking new things on. So I'll just look up my peroration here. So like Carpenter, Shillito promoted an experiential learning through practical exercises and experimentation in tandem with theory. So different to Albers, where it was instead of theory, or at least in advance of theory. With Shillito, it was an experiential thing, but it was taught alongside the theory. She didn't originate a lot of colour theory, but she curated a well-chosen and up-to-date body of theoretical knowledge, colour theory, in the 1940s, and that remained the core of her teaching with judicious additions of other things through the rest of her career. But she withstood the challenge of Johannes Itten's simplistic colour theory, which became sort of dominant around much of the world in the 60s and 70s. Withstood it entirely or very nearly entirely based on what we can see. Which I think was very wise. It was a wise thing to do. So what she did do was she consistently emphasised the intimate grasp of colour relationships that comes from manipulating colour in many, many hours of meticulous colour manipulation in paints. That you get to know colour by actually being able to do that. You know, you can listen to as many lectures like this as you want, but you get to know colour by being able to move through colour by this sort of practice. Okay, and that I think is the wonderful thing of her colour theory. And I'm only talking about her colour theory. I'm not talking anything about her design theory, which had other origins presumably, but I can speak of what the sources of the colour theory. So Eva recalls Shillito in the 70s as a unique, motivating and inspirational educator who knew how to guide her students to observe, experiment, discover and search for alternative answers to prepare them for the fine art field or the commercial field in both 2D and 3D design. Thank you.
For David for keeping the appreciation of colour going.
Okay.
David, one little addition I'd like to make on the influence of Shillito.
Yes.
Through one of her very wonderful students, Jocelyn Maughan. Now, you may or may not know Jocelyn Maughan's work. Maybe not you would, she taught for me. She was originally a student of mine full-time. She was originally a full-time student of mine, and then she did the Shillito course down at the Rocks. And then she wanted to go to the Slade. And she wrote over and did the normal formal applications, and they said, well, we have enough UK students here, we don't want people from the province, as it were. So she was well enough off to put all her Shillito teaching aids and probably some of my stuff that I'd taught her into a folder. She went up to the Slade in London and said, look, I'd like to be a student, this is my stuff. And they said, oh, hang on, don't worry about being a student, you can be on the staff. And so I went over to London, I think about 1980, and I went to the Slade and I met her there, and she was head of printmaking and design. So, and that was the influence of Shillito.
We actually reached out to her, but she's travelling at the moment in Japan. So
is she really? Yeah. Oh, wonderful girl. And put a few of my cards over on the table.
Yes. I've got a few of mine too.
David, I just have one question. You're talking about working through colour, and Shillito was talking about the 15-segment colour wheel. Does that still apply to the digital palette?
What specifically apply?
Well, does her theory and the roots of her theory still apply to what is now going to be the digital palette of the future, where every colour is immediately available rather than needing to mix them and to move through them?
Well, no. I think her 15 that was each of those 15 colours is a paint. It's a carmine or it's an ultramarine. It's an actual physical paint. So it's really a palette-based circle. But I think it's really interesting that she presents that, but then she also presents these other circles that have another basis, you know, perceptual even spacing or the slightly weird compromise that the Ostwald is based on. But no. So you can have different hue frameworks, but I think that one was specifically for paints.
I'm talking about its application in computers, basically, and technology. As technology moves on,
Yes. Yeah.
The requirement for mixing paints has become far less because paints can be mixed on a computer screen in far more immediate and intricate ways.
Yeah, and it's surprising how bad the usual hue circle that everyone uses in Photoshop is. It's extremely uneven perceptually. You know, the colours change rapidly and then they change slowly and so on. So there's better ones starting to be used now, so I'm maybe not really answering your question, but yeah, there's different concerns in having a hue framework for digital colour for sure, and they haven't been solved decades ago, as you might assume. Yeah.
Excuse me, David. Just to address that question, rather than the actual physical mixing, but perhaps the ideas that came out of Shillito and Munsell and other systems like that, where you have a three-dimensional colour solid and the relationships between value and chroma and hue, and that conceptual area, regardless of how you're achieving it, is so...
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
And that isn't undermined at all by... Well, it's just as required, I would have thought, and actually used in the digital setup.
No, if we're talking about that three-dimensional concept, for sure, yes, absolutely, that's...
I was just going to comment that the digital revolution is probably enough for another 10 seminars, and the impact on art and what we all think of that, and how all this is translated into the IT revolution.
You should...
it's just mind-blowing.
You should follow the Colour Society of Australia, because we've got a whole series of webinars recently and ongoing on creating colour. So, just like, subscribe on Facebook or Instagram.
Sorry, just say that again, please.
The Colour Society of Australia.
Okay.
If you follow us on Instagram or Facebook,
It's just a whole new... It was a really good question. It's a whole new, to me, who's not into that so much. It's just such a big can of worms to me.
All right, so another question?
Hello, thank you. Really interesting colour palette of talks. And it made me think of something which might be a little bit sideways, but when I went to work in Japan, Japanese textiles threw everything I thought I knew about colour up in the air and completely changed my palette and my, dare I use the word, taste. And then later on working in Hong Kong, and I was astonished and often worried when I started teaching for the first time there that I had no relationship with the colour palettes of my students. And that I couldn't make judgments because I was making them based on a high school colour wheel and all that sort of thing. And I just wondered, I don't know where colour teaching is going in Australia, but has our sort of interactions with Asia, have they changed things in that way? And also, it might be a really difficult question, but how did those colour palettes come about in Asia? Do we know? Did they have colour wheels and theories at all? I never thought of it before, but it's so different.
First question, where is colour teaching going in Australia now? Less and less time for it, less and less coverage. So in terms of formal education, it's getting more, less and less. But at the same time, there are resources available now, and I think what's happening now is more students are actually seeking out this information themselves, and they may not all of them may go as far as to read a book, but there are some online sources that are reasonably reliable, and so that's the positive side of it. There's interesting work going on among Japanese researchers in terms of colour. Kobayashi is an author who's sort of come up with a classification of combinations of colours in terms of their expressive effect based on surveys of Japanese people. But, you know, the sort of a classification, a 3D classification of combinations of colour, which is interesting. And there's active research into colour spaces and so forth in Japan.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
yeah.
Just a comment from the gentleman's question beside me. Having fairly recently taught stage, set and costume design students and done dyeing with them, and they're all their particularly costume designs are created on computers digitally.
Mm-hmm.
Not one of them could mix a dye colour.
Right.
Not one of them. I had to start from scratch, and they thought it was miraculous that I could make orange and yellow and red. I was a genius.
Yes, it's nice. It's nice being a colour teacher sometimes. Perhaps should we be adjourning to have one last look at the exhibits? Would that be? And perhaps if there's any other questions, I might answer them personally. Oh, just here. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
I'd just like to finish off by saying thank you to our guests. It's amazing when you work in collections, so we're collecting quite a lot of this material, but it's not until you have Catriona and David talking about this stuff technically, and then for Jocelyn to basically give us an oral history, a really extraordinary discussion about that world, and again, technically as well, is eye-opening for those of us who collect this sort of material and hope to continue to share it with the next generations, obviously when none of us are here. It's just wonderful to document all that today. So thank you so much, all three of you. It's been marvellous. And thank you to our lenders today. So we've got some material here that's been lent to us and upstairs as well. Thank you very much for that. Thank you to our donors. So there's material that's been given to us. And of course, Eva's here today, who's given us the latest extraordinary collection of material, some have seen upstairs. And so we've got the Butterworth and the Burgess here as well that we've heard a lot about today, so they're both sitting there now. You're welcome to have a look at those. And thank you all for coming. So see you later.